Good morning, everybody. It's your girl, Miss Reid, the host of, well, no, start over. Good evening, everybody. It's your girl, Miss Reid, the creator of DaaamnDaddy.com, where daddy issues drive discussion, and this is the discussion room. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with the founder of JourneyMom.com, who happens to be a friend of mine from grad school. Her name is Natasha Rodriguez, and she's going to tell us a little bit about Journey Mom, about herself as a woman and a mother, and I'm very excited for her to share with you all today. Hey Tosh,
Hey Meek, it's good to see you.
how are you?
I'm doing all right, rolling with the punches as everyone else.
So we're like 10 months into quarantine and I'm excited about Journey Mom. I was very excited when you started it. I know that some of it comes from your background in education, and you do like diversity trainings and things of that nature, but also you are a mom who loves to solo travel. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself as well as your business?
Sure. So as you said, I do love solo travel. I think the love of travel really came about during college, and it happened after I had my son. He was 6 months old when I did my first study abroad trip to Italy, and it was an absolute amazing experience that I decided to continue to keep doing that. So then I went to Costa Rica, and then I did an alternative break in Guatemala. And then from there, I was like, well, I don't want to stop traveling. So I just continued to do more travel throughout the years. And obviously Journey Mom came about as a result of me being a mom on this journey. I felt like my life really did start after I had Khalil. But it also wasn't just about a journey of motherhood, but also just trying to figure out who I was as a person, because I started to realize, oh, traveling is something that I want to do, but there was a lot of a backlash here and there in terms of like, how do you be a mom as well as this solo traveler? So those are things I've been trying to figure out along this journey.
So, I mean, since you raised that question, how are you a mom and a solo traveler? And like the pushback you were getting, did it have a lot to do with, who's caring for your child while you're out traveling the world? Like, what kind of pushback were you receiving?
So yeah, I think it's just a issue of image, and everyone has a different perspective on what motherhood looks like. And so for some people, it's being around your child 24/7 and giving them that care. For others, it's such as myself, I'll speak for myself. It's I want to be able to be whole so that way I can care for my child. And like some people, for them, they like retail therapy, they like um I don't know, different things. I think for me, travel has been my one passion and love. And so it's something I don't want to give up. And I have a really huge support system on both sides, both my mom's side as well as my son's father's side, where I never really had an issue. If I wanted to travel, I would just need to give advance notice. So that way, folks would know how to create a schedule so he could be with his relatives. And, in the beginning, I thought it was going to be rough, but over the years, I think my son has really grown to appreciate all of my travels. He looks forward to the stories that I share with him. He looks forward to the things I bring back from him. And, he's even told me, like, Mom, like when I get older, I want to travel the world like you someday. And so I asked him, like, well, where's the first place you would want to go? And he's like, well, I want to go to Japan. I like sushi. I like anime. I just think that would be the best place to go first. And I'm like, oh, you want to go far, far. So it's been a good experience.
I like that you bring up that instead of your son feeling like he misses you, he wants to be like you. Because I think that, like you said, people have different images of what motherhood looks like. And women often get that pushback no matter what their choice is. Like for me right now, I stay home with my baby and everybody's like, you need to get back to work. And for you, it was the opposite, like you need to get back to your baby. But I think at the end of the day, as long as our child feels valued, that's what matters. And that's cool that you're inspiring him to want to be a world traveler also. Have you ever considered taking him on your trips with you?
Yes, so that's a question I get fairly often. So Kala has done a lot of domestic travel because it's more affordable for me. When it comes to more international travel, it's like, all right, can I really afford the cost of these too expensive plane tickets? So one thing that I've been trying to do is try to plan out way in advance. So it's like, all right, if we're going to take a trip next year, I can start creating a budget so that way I can afford to take him somewhere internationally. And it was interesting because last year he received his passport after we waited months for him to get it. And then COVID happened, and it was supposed to be his first international trip. He graduated from elementary school. We wanted to take him on a cruise, and it did not happen the way that I had envisioned it, but we are looking forward to planning to go places that, he would want to go. I've definitely asked for his input, like, where would you like to go? And then from there, it's like, all right, well, we need to start saving. We need to start cutting back on some of these games that you like, or, whatever his other desires are. I was like, if that really is something you want to do, the same way that I sacrifice not shopping, not doing my hair as often, whatever, it's because travel is much more valuable for me. It's my one love. I'll definitely say that. So I told him, if that's something you're serious about, you have to understand that you also going to have to do some sacrifice too for us to be able to do these grand adventures.
It's an investment. It's an investment in experiences. It's not necessarily, I think people should reframe it. There's nothing wrong with considering it a sacrifice, but at the end of the day, it's an investment because you get to learn about other cultures more from actually experiencing them than you do from textbooks or PBS specials. Not to say that those things are worthless, but it just elevates the experience. Um, Before traveling to Italy to study abroad, was travel a part of your childhood as well?
Uh, yes and no. So I did get to visit my mom's home country, Panama, when I was like 7 years old. And I remember it was supposed to be like, I want to say like a 2 week vacation to visit family. But for some reason, my mom was having a hard time leaving the country. They weren't trying to let her come back to the US. And so we ended up staying a lot longer than I remembered. But after that, we never went back to visit. I had the opportunity to go and visit Panama last year or the year before, if I'm not mistaken, for one of my birthdays to go visit some relatives. But I mean, between 7 and up until 20, I had not traveled anywhere. So
Okay. So was it a pleasant experience at 7? Like, was this something you knew you wanted to do again, or it was just something that kind of just was like, oh, a family trip, and it never crossed your mind again until study abroad?
the latter, it was just the family trip. And then in high school, I had a mentor, and she was really my motivation and drive to wanting to travel again. She worked for the World Bank. She traveled all over the world, and she was always sending me postcards of her adventures. And I was just like, I haven't been anywhere in a really long time. I would like to go somewhere, but I didn't really have the money to travel. And so when study abroad was an option, I was like, okay, well, how can I get the money to study abroad? And so I applied for scholarships and, sort of explained my situation. And from there, I was able to receive funding. I think, did some like campaigns or GoFundMe, like fundraisers, because I even at times couldn't afford the plane ticket. So I think they would pay for the program, but then if the plane ticket was 1,500, like I'm in school, I wasn't working. I was like, how am I going to be able to make this happen? So I think I also had some folks who helped with the funds for that as well. So
That's amazing. You shared a little bit about your mom being from Panama, and the discussion room is where daddy issues drive discussion. Can you tell me a little bit about your dad, and whether or not, like, is he from anywhere else?
so my dad is from the DC area. Um, so I grew up with my mom. My dad was actually not a part of my life for the first 29 years. And we just recently crossed paths or connected as of a year and a half ago. So it's still fairly new and recent, me getting to know him.
Okay. And after living and being a whole person, a parent and everything for 29 years before meeting your dad, what has this new experience been like? This is like its own journey.
It is his own journey because, like, the family dynamic can be complex at times. I was really excited yet nervous to meet him because I didn't know what type of person he was. It's like meeting a stranger. And so realizing, he had a wife and that he had other children, which means that I now have more siblings. It was a little bit daunting in the beginning, but after meeting up with him a couple of times, he asked me, hey, I would love for you to meet my wife now. So then I end up meeting her. And then after meeting her, it was that conversation of, all right, do you want to meet your siblings now? Because obviously I would need to not have their blessing per se. I don't think that's the word for it. But, if his wife was good with meeting me and she was okay, then it's kind of like, all right, she would be the person to draw my siblings in, because I was nervous about, was there going to be any tension of how they would feel about me as the outside child. So I was very nervous about that, but she did a good job of sort of reeling them in and telling them to give me a fair chance, because I was here out of circumstance. I did not choose to be here, but I'm here now. So now it's like, what are we going to do? We can make the best out of this, or we can make the worst out of it. And so I do appreciate her taking me in and letting me know, like, hey, I'm your mom too. So I really appreciated that.
That's awesome. I actually had a similar experience. Like when I met my brother, his mom is very much so that same kind of person. Is like, I'm I'm your mom too. Like, I call her for Mother's Day or on her birthday, and sometimes it's nice to have extra people, especially when you don't go into it with any type of knowledge of how this is gonna go. Like it could go either way. And I think maybe the difference was, for my experience at least, that my brother's mom knew about me even though I didn't know about my brother. I'm older, so she already knew about me. It wasn't like a surprise or anything. She had to adjust to. So with having new siblings and more family, how has that been? I mean, I know it's kind of difficult because it's only been a year and a half, and for most of that we were in quarantine. But leading up to that, what was the experience like getting to know these extra people in your life?
Um, it started off with shock for, I would say, the two oldest siblings. The two younger ones gravitated towards me out of curiosity. They had like all these questions they wanted to ask me. It was the two older ones that were a little bit more resistant in the beginning. Um, I reached out, after I met them, to let them know, like, I don't want to force this. I want it to happen organically. I want it to grow over time. And I'm open to a relationship as long as you're open to it. And I kind of put that out there. And so when they, like apologized for like our first interaction, and then it was like, all right, we want to get to know you as well. It's just we don't know where to start. And I was just like, well, I mean, the only way is like to, obviously be in communication or to meet up so we can really learn about each other. And so we started a group chat, which helped out a lot. I would go for birthdays. I would go over there just because, for dinner, just so we can start to create some form of relationship. And so from there, it's been pretty good. We talk pretty often. When we all were, together, we would hang out, have a sister's day. We've done happy hours together. So we have been intentional about making sure that we are building that relationship. And then from there, I started having Khalil slowly trickle in as well. So now, he knows about his aunts. He has a good relationship with one of his cousins where they're very close in age. So yeah, it's been a positive. It's been a majority positive experience.
So I remember you said a few moments ago, like you were curious but kind of nervous about meeting your dad, especially with so much time having passed. And you also were one of the attendees of the inaugural Fatherless Father's Day brunch. This scenario could have gone as positive as it has so far, or the very opposite. Do you have any advice for anybody who is looking to connect with a parent that they haven't had a relationship with? What kind of helped you feel ready, even in that nervousness, to take the initial steps?
Oh, that's a good question, Miko. I think I became curious about my dad in college. I think that's when the curiosity started. And I started like trying to ask my mom more serious questions, to which she just sort of overlooked them or chose to ignore. And maybe because she thought I wasn't ready to know all the information yet. Um, but over the years of like just having that genuine curiosity, it's interesting because like I don't think I directly felt a void. I think it came indirectly, where it was just like, folks always saying I look like my dad, or like My mannerisms are very similar to his. I wasn't like my mom. Me and my mom were like complete opposites. So just that curiosity was lingering for a while. And then as I got older and when I had my child, I was very adamant about making sure that Khalil's dad was in his life. I was like, I wanted to be that person to break that generational curse because my mom also didn't know her biological father. So I was like, no, we're not doing this again for another generation. Like Khalil needs to make sure that he has a good relationship with his father. I was adamant about that. I didn't go in with any expectations, honestly. I remember the day that I called him actually, and I was in shock. Like he answered the phone, I heard the voice, and I like froze for a second. And then I started asking, like, is this so-and-so? And he was like, wow, who's calling? And I couldn't say the word, I couldn't say, oh, it's your long lost daughter. Like I just sort of froze. And so he hung up and then he blocked my number. And I was like, oh my God, I lost this opportunity. And I ended up just sending a long text message. And I was like, hey, this is so-and-so. This is who I am to you. This is who my mom is. If you don't want to entertain a relationship with me or talk to me, I respect that. However, I at least wanted you to know that I finally got the information. I found your contact information and I would like to at least have a conversation. So I didn't really go in with a lot of demands. I was like, I just wanted to have a conversation. And I had already put it in my head that if he didn't want to talk or he didn't want to reach back out or have a relationship, I had to be okay with that. I had already pre-programmed myself to not get my hopes up. And I think that also happened as a result of like my sister didn't have a positive experience like I did when she found her dad. So it was like, I told myself this is going to be the same exact experience. Mine is going to be negative too. And so I was just like, all right, like you said, it could go either way. I was leaning towards negative, especially after he blocked me. And then it was like, okay, let me just let him know if he decides not to reach back out, at least I can say, I got the name, I heard the voice. I may not ever see the face, but if he looks like me, I'm just going to kind of figure out what he looks like.
Did he look like you?
Girl, that's my twin. We look exactly alike. It's quite scary how strong DNA can be. When I saw him walk through the door, I said, Lord, that's my dad. Like, he can't deny it.
Now, you just said, Lord, that's my dad. And when I first started, before podcasting, I was blogging. And my first blog post was like the D word, because I don't use that word in terms of my biological father. How was that for you? Like, did it come naturally to you to say my dad? Like, how do you address him?
Not at all. It took a long time for me to even get to that point. I didn't know what to call this man. I was just avoiding any salutation at all. Like I would be like, hey, or how are you? Or like I would not use anything to describe. And I remember talking to a couple of my friends and I was just like, yo, this is awkward. Like I know this is, my father, but I was like, I'm having a hard time saying that word. It was just very uncomfortable because I'm like, I can't give credit to somebody that I don't know. Like they didn't help raise me. Like I just can't give all of that. And so, after getting to know him a bit, I started calling him old man. I started calling him everything. And he was just like, we're going to have to figure out something else because we can't go with the old man. I was like, all right. I said, we're going to gradually get to something. So then it was like, I used pops every now and again. And then I got to the point where I became more comfortable using the word dad. So yes, it definitely, it took some time. I will definitely say that. It was not an overnight process.
I'm glad you guys at least addressed the elephant in the room. And he was just like, no, that's not going to work for me, because I don't think my father even notices that I don't say it. And I've known him my whole life. Like even as a little kid, I didn't say it. So I'm glad that you have found that comfort and it's going well for you. I like that you also mentioned wanting to set things in motion and change for your child by ensuring he had a great relationship with his dad. Was that something that you were conscious about when you met his dad, or while you were pregnant, or like, when did that become like a priority for you that, hey, he has to have a great relationship with his dad?
I think more so when I was pregnant, because I wasn't really thinking about kids at that point. In college, I wanted to study abroad, like as a full-term thing where it was going to be like over a year or how many semesters. Like that was, actually my goal when me and his dad were dating. So I wasn't thinking about kids. But once I did realize that, okay, a baby is coming, it's kind of like, oh crap, like, what is his parenting going to be like? What is my parenting going to be like? Because I was the one that didn't even want to have children. And he was the one that did at some point wanted to have kids along the line. And so once Khalil was born, it was just kind of one of those things. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about him. And I wanted to make sure that he didn't feel any void, that I didn't bring him into chaos or a dysfunctional situation. I really was like, no, like even if me and his dad did not work out, I wanted to make sure that he knew that I would never do what was done to me. So I was like, you know, you will always have a relationship with your child, whether I'm in your life or not. That was kind of something that we agreed upon after we had our child. So yeah, it was definitely very intentional and a conversation that we had a couple of times.
And thus far, all is well.
I mean, his dad's still alive. I haven't killed him yet. So yes, all is well. They have a really, really close relationship. Khalil's definitely been a daddy's boy for a while. I love the bond that they have. It's definitely a great father-son bond for sure.
I've seen it, and I agree. And the fact that he looks equally like both of you to this day amazes me. It's like, all right, how do you continue to grow and change but still equally look like mom and dad? Like, I don't know. It's amazing. I just remember one time he was working and I was like, you don't cook either? And he was like, this is why I work all this overtime so we can afford to eat out. I was like, how is this child surviving on takeout all the time? But you've since begun cooking and that's been fun to watch and witness. What do you like to cook thus far?
Oh, what do I like to cook thus far? I just channel my roots, honestly. Like I love Latin and Caribbean cuisine. So that was like the first thing that I wanted to test out when I started experimenting with cooking. You know, I started cooking when my mom contracted the virus. And it started off with like simple, like just making different soups for her. But then I was like, all right, well, I don't want to just eat soup. I want to eat what I like. So I started making like steamed red snapper, like rice and beans, you know, curry chicken, stewed chicken, brown chicken. I did oxtails a couple times. So anything within the Latin or Caribbean sphere is where my passion for cooking stems from because it's my favorite food. So yeah.
That's cool. And then you just mentioned that your mom contracted the virus. What was that like for you? You know, that's a very scary thing. And I know people who've had it and they got over it and they're just not taking it as seriously. But when it hits home so close like that, you know, how did that impact your life?
Tremendously, actually. I actually had to send Khalil to his paternal grandparents' house so I could move my mom in to be her sole caretaker. And it was, I won't say it was difficult because, you know, the doctors tell you like it's only a 2-week quarantine and then that magic number, everyone's supposed to be better by that point. But that actually wasn't the case for my mom. You know, at the 2-week mark, she appeared to be better. You know, she came out of quarantine, you know, we're eating together, we're talking, having a good time. And it's like a couple of days later, she relapsed even to an even worse condition. She's in and out of the hospital. And it definitely took an emotional toll on me because I already didn't have my son. You know, I'm seeing him literally through screens all day, every day. So I wasn't able to like hug him or kiss him or tell him, you know, like it was awkward. And then I think the most difficult experience was seeing the mental health component of having COVID. She was traumatized. She was scared. She didn't want to go to sleep. She would be up all night crying. She didn't want to eat. You know, I didn't know what to do because, you know, I was just thinking I was going to be a caretaker just serving meals and making sure she's, you know, she's good, but it wasn't that at all. It was just kind of like, all right, now I have to make sure she's taking her medicine, that I'm taking her outside for walks so she can get some sun because she wasn't walking really well. I was helping her with baths because my mom had suffered from lupus. And so like her joints and muscles, if they didn't work, she can't walk. So it literally, I had to be strong for her, but I think I also became a little bit robotic and desensitized in a way, because it was like I was on autopilot. It's like, you got to do it, you got to do it, you got to do it, because if she doesn't get better, you know, like you're not going to see Khalil. So I didn't see Khalil for 2 months. And finally, when she got better, I was like, okay, my son can come home. It was like a breath of fresh air. She's doing much better now, but I think the longest part of that experience was the mental health piece, not specifically the physical component. It definitely was the mental health component for both of us. And I didn't take a break from work. I worked straight through both my 9 to 5 and my business, was helping Khalil with his homework virtually. I was just like, I don't know how I'm doing this all, but like I said, when you're on autopilot and you just have a vision, it's like, you know what, I just got to get this done. I think that's what I was on autopilot. I did not crash until towards the end, where it was like, oh my God, this is a lot for me now. And I need to be able to have time to process and grieve and sort of give myself, you know, like a pat on the back, like, okay, I did that. It took me a long time to get to that moment.
Girl, you need a vacation after that.
Right?
And then you can't even take one.
Can't even take a vacation.
Wow, that's a lot. I mean, you did share with me some of that before, but just like hearing, I think a lot of people are discounting the mental health impact that it is taking on individuals as well as the country overall. I see every day people who are looking for therapy, and other people are sharing resources and telling them like, hey, call your job. They're offering it now, or you know, a lot of insurance companies are waiving copay. But just to hear that it's not necessarily the isolation and the not being able to go anywhere that is causing the mental health impact, but actually having the virus and how scary that can be for someone. You know, I don't think people are talking enough about any of that.
There's one other thing that I did want to add as you were talking. I was thinking about the hospital experience and how it's so different. I think that was traumatizing for me, because I couldn't be there with her. Once you dropped them off, there was a huge sign. It was like, no visitors. So like when she was gone, I could not visit her. And there were actual folks in my community. I remember a couple people whose spouse, parent, whomever died in the hospital, and they could not visit them. And so every time I would drop her off at the hospital, my heart would just like drop into my stomach. So I'm like, this could be the last time I see her. You know, I hate to have that negative mindset, but that's a realistic possibility. And every time I dropped her, I would just cry in my car, like, oh my God, if this is my last moment, like, I hope she know I love her. It was a lot. And there were people who were mad at me. They were just like, well, why are you taking her to the hospital? Like, you shouldn't take her to the hospital. I'm like, but I don't know how to care for her. Like, I'm doing the best that I can, and she's still not getting better. So it's like, I have to let the medical professionals handle it. And it's a risk, but then what if something happens? And it's just like, I'm going to blame myself that I didn't take her to the hospital. So it was a back and forth family drama. And yeah, so everything you can think of happened.
Whew, that's a lot. That's so much. And I'm glad that you shared that, because all of that can be useful to somebody who might be experiencing that now. Like, you know, that, hey, I had to do it. I had to put my child elsewhere. And you did all of that while continuing to work both your 9 to 5 and your business. And it's like, there's just not enough happening. I think too many people have gone back to business as usual, not realizing all the sacrifices that other people are making so that we can safely get back to business as usual. I have lots of thoughts around the virus, so I won't go down that rabbit hole today. But you were sharing that, you know, you were working on your business as well. What has that been like during the quarantine, and like what inspired you to start Journey Mom?
All right, so I'm trying to figure out which question to answer first, because both of those are kind of loaded questions. I'll answer the first one, then I'll go back to the second question. So the first one you asked, how did the business go during quarantine? So I would say I think I sort of like pulled back a bit on Journey Mom. I wasn't I won't say as engaged, but I wasn't putting as much time, effort, and energy, because obviously my energy was going to other places. But after going through that experience, I blogged about it. And it actually was a very therapeutic thing for me, just seeing like, oh, I'm bad. Like, I'm really resilient. Like, it was a good self-esteem booster because it's like, it didn't break me. Like, it made me stronger, realizing, dang, I went through all this and I'm not broken. So I made sure like I blogged about it because I want people to hear about that experience. And then, also with all of the social injustice issues that were taking place, I also blogged about that. So in the space of like quarantine, I became a little bit more vulnerable, and deciding to open up and share with folks who didn't know what was going on. People think about Journey Mom, they think about me traveling and always looking happy. And I was just like, no, I'm suffering just as much as you. And I need you to know that my life is not perfect. And so I decided to be more vulnerable in some of those blogging pieces. So that's kind of how Journey Mom was during quarantine. And then in terms of how I started Journey Mom, it literally, how do I explain it? So after travels, I would always have like a crazy story that I would share with family and friends. And I know some friends was like, you should really go into travel blogging because like the stuff that you go through, like it's just, people would love to hear it. And so I was like, I guess, okay. So, I mean, I always journal, but then it Journey Mom started as just blogging. And then someone was like, are you getting paid to blog? And I'm like, no, I'm not getting paid to blog. I do it because, folks want to hear my stories. And so that's how people are keeping up with me. But then from there, I really did want to figure out how to monetize it. And so I just started connecting it with all my other skill sets, my passion for culture, for travel, for diversity, equity, inclusion work. And it was just like, oh, I could really monetize off of my skill set because they're all feeding into each other. This global experience and my blogging really informs my trainings and my workshops and my speaking engagement. So that's just kind of how it became birthed, so to speak.
That's awesome. Now, I knew that about Journey Mom and that you do diversity and inclusion work. And something I've been wanting to ask you, I know that during the previous presidential administration, there was like this executive order that diversity and inclusion trainings are not considered patriotic. How has that influenced both your day job as well as Journey Mom?
You said, how is it influenced? Well, I mean, luckily it didn't go through, but how did it influence? It honestly was sort of like a slap in the face for all those folks who over the years have been working so hard to create inclusive cultures. The one thing I'm always talking about like is inclusion and belonging. Like when folks feel like they belong, that they're valued, that they're a part of an organization truly, and not just another employee that's getting the work done, but actually being seen as a whole individual. That's a big part of my 9-to-5 job that I do. And it also obviously feeds into Journey Mom because when I'm doing workshops or trainings for outside clients, those are the things that I'm taking from my workplace here that I'm trying to bring to their workplace over there. It's like, this is what we've been doing. I think it could also be beneficial for you. And so, yeah, it does come full circle for sure. But yeah, I kind of was like, what do you mean? Like, this is like not patriarchal. And I don't know. It's just, I felt a certain type of way. I was like, what we're doing is for the greater good. Like, are you telling me that, people should go to work feeling uncomfortable, not bringing their whole selves? Like, it just didn't make any sense. And so those are conversations I did have with a couple of colleagues who are also in the DEI space. And it was like, to just feel as though what we do is not real, it's not valued, it's just a waste. And we're actually opposing, what's the word? Give me a word, Miko. We're going against, progress. I don't know, the grain or progress. Yeah, it was just right. I'm confused. What do you mean we're going against? Like, if anything, we're trying to make progression for all, not just for some. And so I think that's kind of how we're looking at it. It's just like, no, we don't want to hinder the progress that's being done. It's just like, no, we have to continue the momentum of moving forward because we're not there yet. Like, we're not there yet. So to kind of disregard it kind of hurt. And it would have taken a toll on my livelihood, but just on my mental sanity. Cause I'm like, no, I walk, like I think about the spaces that I occupy and I wouldn't want anybody to make me feel like an outsider or like I don't fit in. And I think a lot of people work in jobs where it's just like, they keep their head down, they stay low and out the way. And it's like, let me just get this work done so I can get the heck up out of here. And it's like, I don't want to work in an environment like that. I would like to be able to wake up and feel happy about the place that I'm going to. So yeah, I can go on a tangent about that whole situation, but I was not in agreement with that policy. I was very very disturbed. I think that's the best way of putting it.
And for those who don't know, DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And just to carry through what you were saying in terms of limiting progress or being considered unpatriotic, I think it's very interesting that like since the third grade we've been reading stories about America being this great melting pot. And I'm from Jersey, so like they always talk about New York City being this amazing melting pot and Little Italy and all these different cultures that are like a microcosm all in one city or this one country. I find it very interesting that people wanting to highlight the melting pot that America is by showing each different ingredient and highlighting what each ingredient brings to the flavor of the dish of this melting pot is considered unpatriotic. But people who commit actual acts of treason, they're not viewed with that same negative space. I don't know. That bothers me. But I am glad. I didn't know that it didn't go through because I try to stay away from the news. So I just see like little snippets of things like that. And I have been curious as to how that would be affecting you. I'm glad to know that it didn't go through.
Can I add something? I love your example about the melting pot. And in my work, one of the things that I talk about is like we really try to stay clear of a melting pot, because when you think about a melting pot, you're putting all these things in and then it's turning into one thing, and it's kind of like, well, I don't want to be a melting pot. We kind of look at it and we try to say it's more like a salad bowl, because you're thinking of all the different ingredients that go into a salad and they all still stand out. They blend together to make a beautiful flavor, but every single ingredient gets to remain the exact same, if that makes sense. Versus like when you're putting everything into a pot, they all are sort of blending together. And so we're not looking really for like assimilation. It's more so of like
appreciation.
Yes, thank you. That's a better way of putting it.
I like that. Salad bowl. That's a new one. Taught me something new today. Oh, okay. So along those same lines, about culture and appreciation, how do you identify? I know that was like one of your big blog posts that I recall reading. So how do you identify and how did you get comfortable in that space?
Are we talking about in terms of like race and ethnicity?
Yes.
Okay, so I identify as Afro-Latina, and it took me a long time to get to that point of even saying that. So I think growing up in my household, which is very multicultural and unique, I didn't know exactly what I was. I just knew I always stood out and I looked different. But then growing up in a heavily like Latin household within a predominantly Black neighborhood, and I'm going, like my family spoke Spanish, but when I would leave out the household and I would go to school, all of my friends were Black and they spoke English. So I'm just like, oh, Black girl from DC, like this is what it is. But then it's like you're going into spaces where it's just like folks would kind of remind you that you're not Black or not Black enough. Oh, your last name is Rodriguez? Like, that's not a Black last name. Oh, your hair is not like mine, or I'm too light, or whatever. I mean, I got teased about everything. So I was just like, I believed I was Black, but then apparently you're telling me I'm not Black. So now I'm confused. And then as I got to college, I really started exploring more of my Latin roots. And I was getting like to know more, like, had accumulate more Latin friends. But then the one thing I realized was that lack of connection through language, where they would sit around, they were talking in Spanish. I can put context clues together about what they're talking about, but I wasn't confident enough to reply in Spanish. Like I would understand it and I would respond in English, because that's what I did at home. It's like my grandparents spoke to me in Spanish, I responded in English. So that's just what it was. And so it was just like, okay, like I started embracing more of my Latin roots as I got older. And then I think just through travel and some of my passions, and then learning a lot about Panama, I think I just started really embracing how unique Panama is. Because when I went there recently and I did the tour of the Panama Canal Zone, you're just learning about just the rich culture and experience of how all these immigrants from the West Indies came and helped to build the Panama Canal Zone, and they stayed there and they had families. And so when I did, DNA research, historical research on some of my lineages, not my dad's side, but specifically on my mom's side, like you know, my grandmother's dad and them were from Barbados. They migrated over to Panama. My grandmother was born there. My mom was born there. And then I was born in DC. So I was like, okay, so like this is a little bit more complex. It's not just, you know, my dad is a Black man from DC. So it's not just like, oh, you know, I was trying to figure out, I didn't want it to be segregated. And I think for a little bit, I was like, oh, I'm Black and I'm Latina. And I mean, I was okay with you saying that for a while, but then when I learned about the concept of an Afro-Latina as someone who really does embrace their African ancestry, it was just something that was more meaningful and sentimental to me. And so that's just kind of how it sort of came about. So I'm still like in the identity process. Like it can get complex because, like I tell people, we're not one singular layer when it comes to identity. We're just like an onion, multiple layers. So when I try to tell people like, no, like I identify as Black, Latin, Caribbean, like I can be all of those simultaneously. Don't try to have me pick apart and tell me, no, I can be this and not that. That's not how we work as people in general. We all have different identities. You know, I'm not just an Afro-Latina woman, but I'm also a mom. I'm also a daughter. I'm also, you know, like a friend, a mentor, an educator. Like, don't try to box me in. Like, that's not how I work over here. And you know that. Like, I get so heated when people try to box me in. It's like, no, I can be all those things at once. I can see it in different channels based off context, but as a person, I'm one whole person full of so many layers. So
That's very interesting that you shared that identity itself is complex. Like your grandmother's family was from Barbados, but she was born in Panama, so she's considered Panamanian. So like people, you know, nationality is not the same as cultural identity. And I think that as Afro-Latina or as Blacks in general in America, we don't have that. I won't say that. You know what? I'll say for me specifically, because I do have friends who are Caribbean, but and they do have that tie. Like I don't think that we have the benefit of understanding the difference between race, ethnicity, and nationality a lot of times, because we are all always living under this lens of what we look like phenotypically. So you know, it's like you said, that box, like, oh, you look Black, so you in this Black box, or that's how people who are non-Black view you. But then when you're within the Black community, you get categorized as not Black enough, or you know, you too Black, you know, all these different things. When I had my grandmother on, I do wish I asked her more questions about that, because I know growing up, my grandmother's mom could pass for white physically for the most part. And then I was told that she had done that, and one of her grandchildren were working in a bank and excused themselves and said, oh, that's my grandmother. And that person was like, that lady white, that's not your grandmother. The whole time my great grandmother was not white. And I remember being a child and saying to my mom, like, oh, there's two Michael Jacksons, the Black one and the white one. And she was like, no, there's just one. And I was like, no, that one is white, like your grandmother and your aunt. And my mom was like, my grandmother and my aunt are not white. So just that whole concept of identity based on appearance is very complex in itself. And I like your analogy of using an onion. But for me, I had the kind of opposite experience. I'm not Latina, and like it's embarrassing somewhat to realize how long it took me to come to terms with the identity I created for myself as a child. So I knew my father. I didn't have a relationship with him, but I was very close with his siblings. And for whatever reason in my mind, I did not necessarily associate his siblings with him. So I used to tell people that my father was Puerto Rican. It's partially my mother's fault, because she's always making fun of me and calling me a can. She's like, you Puerto Rican with all your colorful, you know, all of my colorful attire and things of that nature. But I lived in a community where I was lighter than most of my peers. I was small and smart and got picked on and called little white girl. And then when my mom moved, my upstairs neighbors were Cuban and the babysitter was Puerto Rican. So I was surrounded by Latin culture and kind of embraced that and felt like that was closer to how I felt. Even like when it came down to playing with dolls, you had Barbie, Teresa, and Christy. Christy was the Black Barbie. She was darker than I was. Barbie was white. Teresa looked like me. So I always asked for the Teresa doll because she looked closer to me in complexion. And it just kind of started there at like 5 or 6 years old with this whole concept of me being Puerto Rican. I actually have a cousin whose father's Puerto Rican. And like you said, for him, his grandmother doesn't speak English, but he doesn't speak Spanish. And I speak more Spanish than him. I'm like, how are you the Puerto Rican? I'm like, this is just not fair. How does that happen? But it's very interesting. It's very interesting how all of those dynamics come to play. And you were talking about what you learned in Panama. I know my mom took me to DR in 2013, I want to say, and they have a statue. We went to the capital, Santo Domingo, and there's like three statues. One is of the Taino, one is of the African slaves who were brought there, and one is of the white settlers. And the statue explains how in DR everyone is made up of those three things. So it's like, when you have people who are Dominican who deny being Black, they're not necessarily wrong because they may be descendants of colonizers in the Dominican Republic. They don't necessarily identify as Black, even if they are on an island that had that Taino culture mixed with that African culture, because their ancestors were colonizers who are not connected to their African ancestry. So it's like, what it was on Twitter, people are always bringing Cardi B into that conversation. And she's like, could y'all just leave me alone, please? Like, when I say I'm Black, I'm not Black enough. When I say I'm not all the way Black, then I'm denying my Blackness. Like, there is no one right answer to that question for so many people. So like now, even when I fill out forms, I just say African American because it's like, all right, I don't have any ties that I'm aware of to any Latin continent or island or anything like that. And though I can trace my ancestry to Irish roots, I'm not connected to that culture either. So it's just like Black or African American. So go ahead.
No, one other quick thing that I wanted to say, because I had a really good conversation with one of my colleagues who studies this, and we were talking about, he said it best, like Blackness is a global, it's a global experience. And it's not just one thing. Like when I think of Blackness, I mean, it's just a huge array of different things, whether it's, you were of African descent or whether, you're Caribbean descent, whether you're Latin, whether you're, African American, someone who's raised in the States. It's just like when people try to make it very exclusionary and they're just like, no, Black is this and this and this. And it's just like, no, like Blackness is a global experience. We all experience it differently, but we can't say it's the same thing, if that makes sense. I'm trying not to be confusing, but we had like a really, really like high level conversation about Blackness being a global experience. We're all experiencing it differently. But there's some complexities for how some people look at it. Unfortunately, they look at it very, very narrow-minded. And it's like, well, they go based off, let me say this. They go based off their personal experience, which I don't negate. If that is your personal experience, I cannot take that from you. But I think it's unfair for you to also then try to take that from me. It's like, no, based off my experiences, this is what I know a Black person is. And it's just like, okay, so if you can understand that for you, why can you not empathize and understand that my Blackness is very real? It just comes in a different form than yours. So I'll leave it at that.
No, that's very real. Just even thinking about like Andre 3000 wore a shirt one time that said darker people suffer more globally, why? Or across continent, whatever it was, that was like the gist of it. And I think about, again, that phenotype when we think about the caste system in India, or just the paper bag test at HBCUs and stuff like that, the things that people don't want to talk about. One thing that is often associated with Blackness is lack of privilege. We won't go down that rabbit hole today, but I do think that there are some commonalities globally that help people feel like Blackness is X or Blackness is Y. But I think that some of those things are problematic. Like for me, being smart was what caused people to call me little white girl. It's like, no, I can be Black and smart. Like, those two things are not mutually exclusive. Now I forget where I was gonna go with that question. We started talking about like your culture and identity, and like how do you feel like those things show up for you in the workplace or in your business? Like, do you consider them strengths working in the DEI space?
Absolutely, there is strength for the DEI space because I am multicultural. I'm able to see from different lenses. So I feel like I can relate to more people. Um, which is interesting that you asked that because my friends are, for lack of a better term, like a rainbow. Like they're very diverse, whether it's racially or gender, sexual orientation, like just everything you can think of. I have a very diverse spectrum of friends. But I think because I am so diverse in my identity that I'm able to reach more people. So that I think it's a win-win situation, definitely. Like my experience and who I am as a person definitely feeds into the work that I do, very much so. They're interconnected.
Okay, well, I think that I got to know more about you and your business today. I do want to ask you, in the short time that you've known your dad, what is one thing you feel like you've learned from him?
Um, mm, 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 mm. I mean, I'm still getting to know him, but I think just based off of some of the conversations that we have had, my dad is he's a very strong personality, I'll say that. And so he doesn't care what anybody thinks. Like my dad is genuinely going to be him. I think the one thing that I definitely try to be on my own, which he sort of indirectly feeds, like I always just wanted to be myself no matter what, even when people didn't like me or they would tell me that I'm something else. Like I always just wanted to be as authentic as possible and to be accepted for who I was. And I think just seeing my dad, and my dad is that type person, like I can give two flying, you can fill in the blanks. Like my dad is that person. Like that's him. That's who he's going to be till he dies. And he's always just like, baby girl, just do you. You ain't gonna be able to please everybody. So he's learned me to care less about what other people say and care more about knowing who I am on a personal level and not worry about others. So I could say he's at least helped me with that.
Showing up authentically. That's amazing. And what is your favorite experience in motherhood?
My favorite experience in motherhood. Honestly, appreciating all the different stages. It's so interesting because like I've enjoyed them all. Like, yes, there are some stages that are more challenging than others. I'll say that. But I've enjoyed just watching him grow. Like, I have my days like, oh my God, I miss when he was a baby. Like, I'm looking at, Delilah right now. And I'm just like, oh my God, like, I miss when he was that little. But then I also get to see him grow and learn and be able to be vocal. So it's funny because like when he was little and you have to play the guessing game of like, are you hungry? Are you wet? Like just say something, right? And then they get to the phase where they don't know when to shut up, right? And then they get to the phase where they're super opinionated and it's like, oh my God, like I'm appreciating all of those stages in this journey. Like you saw Khalil when he came and said hi before the interview, like he's as tall as me currently, his voice is getting deeper, like he's just going through the whole puberty process. And it's like, as a former middle school teacher, I know all of the challenges that come with puberty and being an adolescent. It's a very tough time. So I am like equipped to deal with all the hormones that are going to come. But I think that's the blessing about motherhood. I've only had, one child, and just seeing him go through his own journey and watching him grow before my eyes, I'm just like, it's a beautiful thing. It's a very beautiful thing for sure. So I appreciate all the stages.
Girl, oof, that guessing game, it's some serious. I'm like, man, what do you want? I just changed you. Oh my gosh, are you hungry? You ate all the carrots. Like, what do you want? Ooh, I feel like Tyrese sometimes. What more do you want from me?
Yep.
Is there anything else that you would like to share today, personally, professionally? Anything on your mind or heart you would like to release?
Yeah, I said 2021 was all about manifestation. And so the one thing that I have been trying to be more vocal about, because normally like I don't say much, but I think I do want my Journey Mom business to flourish more. Like there's a lot that I can provide, a lot of resources, a lot of experience, expertise, and a lot of different facets. And so if anything, I just want to put out there, if you have not gone to, journeymom.com, I would advise you to go take a look, see the services, learn a little bit more about me. Because 2021, I'm definitely trying to have more conversations such as these. I want to do a lot more speaking engagements and continue with the DEI work that I'm so passionate about. So I think if anything, it's just like, check your girl out, journeymom.com, follow, subscribe, all that good stuff.
Well, there you have it. Thank you for joining me in the discussion room today and continuing your journey of being vulnerable by answering all my questions and just sharing another part of your life with me. You had a question?
She's agreeing with everything that you're saying.
Okay. And as always, you can follow me, Miss Reid, on social media at DaaamnDaddy, and that's DAAMNDaddy, as well as DaaamnDaddy.com. And that's it for today.
Thanks for having me, Meek.
Thank you for joining me.